My name's Bob Forward. I have been working in children's television practically since I was a kid myself. I think I started at 19 working on Beast Wars. Working on He-Man. I was a storyboard artist first. From storyboard I moved into writing because I discovered that writing allowed me to cause the problems instead of trying to solve them. And I've slowly moved further and further in the field. I enjoy cartoons and I enjoy animation in general, and I enjoy children's programming. Now that I've got kids of my own, it's been a lot of fun. My wife's a storyboard artist for Disney, and so my kids have pretty much grown up believing that every parent in the world leaps out of bed on Saturday morning and runs downstairs to watch television and watch the Saturday morning cartoons. And of course, for them, their parents, they don't know that not every parent not only watches the cartoons, but doesn't go, "Ah, they ruined it!" Which is what tends to happen here. So I've been working a long time in the field, as I said, and I was interested in learning more about it. Even when I worked at Filmation, I was constantly driving my boss crazy because I would never be at my desk. I would be down watching the animators, or I would be down trying to see how the ink and paint worked, or watching the guys shooting the camera, everything. I wanted to learn it all. And so over the years I've managed to do a lot of that, and with Beast Wars it was my first chance to actually try directing. I especially loved CG. Once I started it, I just realized this was a medium that was a lot of fun. It was a medium in which unlike 2D, and 2D is great, I love 2D, but it's its own medium. But the fact remains that whenever you're working in 2D, you're very aware that they did it better 50 years ago. I mean, for one reason or another. I mean, you look at what you do, and it's pretty good. It's not Pinocchio. I mean, it's very good considering many things, but the neat thing about CG is it's always getting better. And so everything that you're doing, every time you go into work, it was exciting because you'd be saying to yourself, we're going to do things today that have never been seen before. I mean, every day you were breaking new ground. Every day somebody would go, "Look what I figured out!" And you'd be looking at it, you're going like, that is really cool. And no one's ever done it before, at least not on a television budget. And so that was what made it exciting to work on a show like Beast Wars. And that was why once the time for contract renegotiations contracts came up, one of the writers in my contract was I wanted to direct an episode, and actually Mainframe was really great about it. They let me come up there. I lived there for 4 months. I worked with a very talented crew, and I had a terrific time. And in that process, I learned that directing is quite addictive, and I've been more or less trying to get chances to do it ever since. Larry DiTillio and I had a really good working relationship. I think we complemented each other really well. Larry was very involved in the details, how things worked. He really liked coming up with really interesting characters, really almost reprehensible characters sometimes, and he would always try and work out the rules of the universe that we were creating. I tended to kind of wing it more, I have to admit. I wanted to get right into the action. I'd rather not have characters sitting around and talking if I can have them speeding over the landscape and talking while firing their weapons at the same time. It's, it tends to run expensive that way, but and from Larry, I did learn a lot, and from Beast Wars, I learned, I think, more about writing character than I'd ever learned before. And part of that was simply because Beast Wars had such a limited number of characters that we had to work with, such a limited number. I mean, we were always writing what we called inside the glass box. We felt like we were constantly enclosed in this glass box of we only have a certain number of sets, we only have a certain number of characters. Our job was to keep the audience always looking inward so nobody would notice how close against the walls we constantly were of what we couldn't do. Instead, we would make sure that the story concentrated on what we could do and what we could do really well. And, you know, we had learned from the animators, and one things we could do really well was we got great acting out of those robots and those animal forms. I mean, those guys at Mainframe were just tremendous animators, and it was all keyframe stuff. You know, they were just really, really good at that stuff. We learned we could trust them to give us expressions and things that would really sell the emotion of a moment. And because we, you know, had a limited number of characters, we couldn't just constantly be doing shows in which we were introducing somebody's cousin or something like that. So instead, we just had the characters start to bicker constantly. So they were always on edge. And that just became really dynamic. And it's something that I've, you know, carried through ever since, is just how neat it is if the characters aren't always agreeing with each other all the time. I think that kind of puzzled the fans at first that were fans of the original G1 series, because in the G1 series it was basically Optimus would issue a command and everybody would follow it, and the same thing with Megatron, and that had kind of a team player aspect to it, but they had 9 zillion characters they could mess with, and they were, you know, had constant, you know, wars between huge armies. We had 14 characters. We couldn't budge on that, and so our characters had to squabble a lot, and in that squabbling it allowed us to really bring out some really neat aspects of those characters. I'll be honest, when Larry and I started out, we did not know a whole lot about the Transformers universe. We didn't know there were news groups out there about it. We didn't know very much. We did know that Hasbro knew about it because they emphasized. They had these huge fan followings, and we're like, yeah, yeah. And they said, oh, yeah, we got these news groups, yeah, yeah. But once we started working on it and we started messing with the Beast Wars concept, I think I wrote the pilot without really knowing anything. But I made mention of a great war. Well, I just meant, you know, okay, there was this great war, and that kind of explains why the Predacons and the Maximals were constantly fighting. At that point, Larry clued me into the news groups that he'd found about the Altoids Transformers and other things that you found on the internet, and they were very excited, and they assumed that it was talking about the war between the Autobots and the Decepticons. And we started to look at this stuff, and as we were reading the news groups, we were sort of lurking for quite a long time, just reading the fan reactions to stuff. And we can't help it, we're writers. We see little seeds here and there that we could sort of play in that actually help tie it into the original Transformers. And neither a Mainframe nor Hasbro seemed to mind if we actually just sprinkled in these little seeds, and in many ways we were dropping in seeds that we had no idea what we were going to do with them, but they just seemed like good little flavors at the time. One of the guys from Hasbro, Anthony, I believe, had suggested a golden disc from Voyager was the reason that they had come to Earth this time. And we didn't even know at the time whether we were going to put it in the past or whether it was going to be just a completely different planet altogether. It was very hard to get a solid decision from marketing because they themselves were trying to figure out exactly where they were going with this show. So we put 2 moons in the sky, figuring just in sort of a random way. It's like, okay, if we decide this is going to be Earth later on, we can always blow up a moon. We'll figure out a way how to blow up a moon. And lo and behold, that's exactly what we ended up doing. And it tied into a huge story arc that made it look like we really knew what we were doing this whole time. And frankly, no, we were scrambling constantly trying to go like, oh God, thank God we did this back here, because now we can pull this up and make it a big and important plot point that we had alluded to way back here. Everything from just the little Stonehenge type rock formations that, again, that was just something, we had one. Mainframe happened to have one around, so they threw it in there and we talked about it. And lo and behold, we ended up with aliens and the Vok and everything else, and that ended up blowing up the moon. But it really was. We were winging it constantly, and that was, if I may say so, something I was better at. Was just coming up with convincing reasons to make it look like we had actually known what we were doing. After Beast Wars was over, and I'd had a really good experience as a director on Beast Wars. One of the things that happened on Beast Wars was when I went up there to direct, it was not something that I had done before, and but I had been a storyboard artist before. So in my belief that I needed to know exactly what I was doing because I needed to be able to get a show done even though I'd never done one before, I storyboarded the entire episode myself. That was not something that Mainframe had ever really done before. Occasionally they would do partial storyboards. Most often they would simply wing it. The director would try to explain to an animator kind of what he had in mind, and the animator would do it, and then they would tweak it around a little bit. No one had ever tried to do a storyboard in an animatic before, literally to shoot the storyboard so that it was 22 minutes and 8 frames long, which was how long we were doing these things, and then just do those individual scenes. And to be honest, the animators were a little resistant at first. They had never really dealt with it before. They quickly came around. What was unusual about it was we started in Act 3. I mean, we actually started with the very hardest scenes because I knew they were going to take the longest to do. And if we couldn't do those scenes, there was no point in doing the show. I mean, we had to be able to do these scenes. Dinobot getting just blasted, and Walter built 3 different versions of. Walter was my senior animator, and he built 3 different versions of Dinobot in various stages of destruction, and we mapped out which ones needed to be used in which scenes, and actually I threw the management into a bit of a panic because we seemed like we were really behind compared to the other crews. The other crews would start off with a lot of easy stuff. They would start from the beginning and work their way to the end, and they would take a lot of the dialogue stuff. But what they didn't realize was that my crew was working on the very hardest stuff from the beginning. Towards the end, we were breezing through it, and they were starting to try and give us. I almost wanted to resist. It's like, no, we can do it, and we literally finished a day early, which no one had ever done before. And the crew was so exhausted, they said, "Don't tell anybody; they'll make us go work on other crews." So we just. Everybody had to come in, and they all had to sit at their desks, but nobody had to do anything, and everybody just like quietly, celebrated not having to work for a solid day, it was great. And ever since, Mainframe has used storyboards constantly, and they saw that there was a good reason for it, and I took that experience and moved over to supervising producer on a series called Dan Dare, which was done by Foundation amongst other people, and used my experience there to, I was not the director, but basically I was the person on site to make decisions, and just with that show, we just had to get it done. I mean, it had had financial difficulties amongst other things, and it was very important. No matter what, you didn't go back. You didn't have to, retakes. We couldn't do it. It's like we had to meet the budget. We had to meet the time, and through that. Again, I was doing all the storyboard changes because nobody had budgeted for a storyboard supervisor. So basically, I had to do that. I wore a lot of hats on that episode, on that series. But what that taught me was just I knew how to get things done. And so when my kids actually started messing around with video cameras and trying to make their own movies, and as kids always will, get a little overwhelmed, they get lost. But I had already been working with editing equipment. I already knew how to get stuff done. I said, if we're going to do this, let's do one. And they were, sure, why not? I had a son who was working an older son who was working as a video editor who had showed me some neat things that could be done with video compositing. I had a younger son who was at that time a brown belt in karate. He had some friends who were willing to do fight scenes, and we just knew that we could probably get away with shooting some cool stuff with toys. And the end result was we wrote a little short 15-minute film called Agent 12. And over the course of about 6 months, we spent $900 and we made a little short film that is, given how cheap we did it, and we did the whole thing in my garage, it's pretty damn cool. And the kids had a tremendous time. We all had a great time, and we got it done, which I think is what surprised people more than anything else. My friend Frank Becker did the music. He did a great job. Angus and I did the sound effects all by ourselves. I mean, we had him dancing on metal chairs to do the footsteps, and smacking the chairs to do the hits and the kicks, but the important thing was that by doing a storyboard, by pinning up the discs, by keeping track of everything we needed to do, we did manage to do a 12-year-old super spy movie with rocket-powered jet cars and giant robots and everything else, and we got it done. And because of that, we're doing another one, and it's gotten us a lot of attention, and it got us enough attention so that when the new Thunderbird series came out, which involved miniatures, basically toys and blowing stuff up and everything that we were already doing, the producer saw Agent 12, and I got hired. So, so Agent 12 actually got me a job, and for that I am, you know, grateful in and of itself. But just because obviously I knew what I was doing when it came to working with miniatures for dealing with the kind of things that they needed to deal with. Because when we're just starting the Thunderbird series, and that's, you know, it's not CG. It's all being done with miniatures and puppets and everything else. But because of the Agent 12 experience, I know very much of what they're going through, and I believe that's helping me in the writing of that. As far as a place in my career, Beast Wars has just got a big warm spot in my heart. I don't think I've ever had so much fun working on a series. The amount of emotion that Beast Wars sponsored still stuns me. I mean, when I meet fans and they just tell me how much it meant to them, it just I almost want to cry. I almost want to apologize. I almost want to say, I'm sorry, a lot of the time I was just like jamming something out, you know. If I'd known it was going to like affect you this much, I would have worked harder at it. But still, I think that for sort of free-swinging, swashbuckling spirit that Beast Wars had gave it part of its charm. And I think if we'd worked harder at it, it would have gotten overworked. I think it worked well, just the way it was.